Well, I think the important thing to remember there is that, first of all, ethno-state or not, white people have a right to exist. White people have a right to exist as whites, and they have a right to exist as whites in a white nation. That's a moral premise that we want to establish. And white people have a right to fight for themselves, to collectivize and fight for their rights wherever they live. North America, Europe, wherever. So we can get into logistics, but it's also important to understand that we have this belief and this desire for a reason. So right now, our countries are being essentially invaded. We are being inundated with propaganda telling us to hate ourselves, that we're evil. We're being told to cuckold ourselves, literally. We're being inundated with, this degenerate propaganda, anti-nationalist propaganda, anti-white propaganda. So we are under assault. And given this, I'm not that sympathetic to argument to say me making a case for my people and my nation is untenable or so. It's okay, but that doesn't make my moral case any less. So if you want to talk about how would I do it, okay. I mean, we do it by we take power and we establish state policy. I mean, these people didn't come into our country via some neutral, natural osmosis. Like, they came in as a matter of policy. And also this idea, okay, these are inherently migratory people. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about blacks who were brought here, but the major demographic shift in the United States has not been from blacks. It has been from Hispanics migrating up from South America. And now increasingly we're getting people coming in from the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East. And everybody says, like, oh, how could you uproot these people? Well, these people don't have roots. If they had roots, they would never have left where they came from to come here. So I'm not that concerned with like uprooting fundamentally migratory peoples. Certainly to establish the North America as the white state, that would require people with the intent of doing that, taking power and then enacting state policies that would remove some of these people, and it could be peaceful. But ultimately, if white people decide in the majority this is what we want, then whether it's peaceful or not is really up to the others, right? It's up to them whether it's peaceful. So, I think I get the whole, oh, you don't have specific proposals, and that's fine. I actually do. Well, for one, we deport all illegal immigrants immediately. We revoke birthright citizenship. We require employers to verify U.S. citizenship for employment. We require U.S. citizenship for voting. We get rid of H-1B programs. We remove the ability of anybody who's not a legal resident to receive any sort of welfare or state benefit at all, to receive any sort of license at all, to really have any effective rights in our country if you are a lawless person that's come here illegally. We do a lot of that. And then we do family reunification the other way. So when those people are when illegals are repatriated, any family members that are here, they can join them, because we don't want to rip these families apart, as the left-wing media always says. So basically, a series of hard-nosed policies would already get the ball rolling in the right direction. Like, I think 100% would be like a stretch in any sort of reasonable period of time. But certainly, we could get the ball rolling to the fact where by 2050, they're saying white people are going to be less than 50% of America. I think with the right policies, we could have white people back to 75% of America by 2050. So it's not like I want to. It's not like I want to institute this regime of literally no person of brown skin on this entire continent. That's obviously not even realistic. But I think that certainly policy brought these people here. Policy can remove them. They're fundamentally migratory. They're not rooted, and they were brought here by incentives. Reverse those incentives, and they'll go. And we can get ourselves back on the right track that way. And we also do not need to justify our moral position to anybody. Like, we're under attack. My question to people that say this, what's going to happen? What's the logistics of globalism? What's the logistics of this anti-white system that you're imposing? What's the logistics of millions of Muslims flooding into Europe? What's the logistics of millions of South American Indians flooding into the United States? What happens then? What happens to white people under what they want? Because that's the question that concerns us. We're always asked to bear the moral burden of caring for others, and we never care for ourselves. And we're just done with it. So that's my answer.
Well, and I'm sick of doing other people's thinking for them. So they're, oh, what are the logistics? It's like, you think about it,
You
dummy.
come up with something, yeah.
You come up with something. How did Israel get their ethno-state? You think about it. I'm not going to answer endless logistic quibblings. Like, you need to go and you need to be a thinker. You know, apparently you're a thinker and you can ask these clever gotcha questions, so you can sort of mull this over yourself. It's just, I'm tired of the question. Like, you go and think about it.
And also, like, the moral right of us to fight for our rights and ourselves and advocate for ourselves, that's not going to be, that's not what they're ultimately doing, is saying, because you can't logistically create your ethno state perfectly with no violence, your group identity and your moral right to fight for yourselves is revoked. That's the implication of these kinds of questions. I'm not saying that this is what this guy is doing, because there are people that genuinely are just curious about this. And when that's the case, I'll talk to them. But when I get the sense that this question is being asked as like a gotcha or a bad faith way of attacking our values, then I get a little bit angry. But honest questions, then I would have a discussion with people. I think, though, that there's a germ of truth to what he said, which is that others might perceive us as absurd because we want the ethno state, but then we won't give specifics on how to get there. But my answer to that is, like, what I want to present to the general public is the moral right of white people to collectively self-identify and defend and protect our rights and ourselves. Once we've established that, you'll notice that when people become convinced of that, the logistical questions of how do we do this or that sort of fades into the background, and the struggle for our rights becomes paramount and their main priority. So that's what I'm pushing for right now, is in the here and now, white people, you have a right to exist. You have a right to collectively advocate for yourselves, and you can join the fight or not.
I want to add real briefly that Stefan Molyneux made a video why I was wrong about nationalism. And he said the same thing that you were saying, Mike. He was saying that, you know, if you oppose whites having their own ethno-state, then you have to also, in principle, oppose the Japanese having their ethno-state and the Israelis having their ethno-state and the Mexicans having, you know, ethnographic sort of assurances in their constitution. So that makes you racist. And there are a lot of people that, you know, are sort of big and in the right wing that sort of carry on as if he didn't make that video, as if he didn't say that, you know. So there is a sort of kind of chosen obliviousness on the part of some people, where they just say, oh, well, I haven't encountered these things before, and oh, you're an alt-right person, so well, it's good optics for me to fight the alt-right. And that's sort of what it boils down to a lot of the time. So
yeah, I think a lot of the questioning and nitpicking is also people finding reasons for their own apathy and cowardice. You know what I mean? It's like people are like, well, until you can answer all these questions perfectly, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines, you know? And it's like, no, we're in a struggle for our people and our civilization. And whether or not we can create the perfect demographic ethno state on North America with absolutely no brown people at all is not really relevant to whether or not we have a right to engage in that struggle. So, yeah.
Also, I've never really heard anybody else be put to this standard that we have to have all the answers right away when we say we want to have an area to ourselves. Even if it's just we want to be able to have white neighborhoods, not even an ethno state, just white neighborhoods. We're held up to a standard of having to have all the answers and all the hypothetical theories of what if aliens invade? What are you going to do then? I've never heard anybody of any other race or ethnic group be put to the standard of outright embarrassment, as we are when they talk about the ethno state, which really can be considered just an exercise to think about, okay, what would we do if we were given the opportunity to have this? Even then, no one else is put to that standard to have all the answers right away.
And you'll notice, like, opposition to white only spaces, people will pretend not to be opposed to it until it's a realistic possibility. So right now, the realistic possibility of whites in the United States, or possibly in Europe too, being able to essentially create a town or even an apartment block for white people only is not realistic. We don't have that ability. We don't have that power. We don't have that right. The federal government, through several different programs and enforcement, will come in and actively disrupt the attempt of white people to, through their desire to freely associate with themselves only, which is something that is obviously a desire that white people have, given the history of white flight in the United States. It's a clear preference that people have expressed again and again and again, which is why so much government enforcement is needed to force diversity on us. The fact that we can't realistically do that now means that you will get people in these debates that will like grant you that premise. But as soon as it got to the point where we're like, all right, well, now we've done it. We've created a white town. That you don't really have the right to do that because some principle or something like that. So they'll like grant you like, well, sure, if you just want. I mean, I've had this conversation so many times. I don't object to a white town. I don't object to a white only business. I don't object to a white apartment building. It's like, right, because it's not a realistic possibility. You don't think it's even possible on the horizon. As soon as our advocacy gets to the point where we have made that a possibility, then you'll start fighting it. The way you know, so yeah,
right, or like a white school, that absolutely can't have that. And I think people forget, when talking about, obviously, I'm not trying to say that we should do this to the other people, what's been done to us, kind of thing. But white children were literally forced in America, literally, and I mean literally, with guns to their backs. To go to school with blacks.
Yeah, I mean, really.
Forced,
People never like examine the other side of that question and look at how odd that is. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not saying. Oh, go ahead, please.
People were really upset about it. I mean, people were having stand-downs with the police and stuff like this. Oh, you ever see the pictures of the whites and the blacks arm in arm? Whoa, we shall overcome. But a lot of people were really opposed to this. And, that's just played down, So, that's not
good. They had their reasons. And if you think they didn't, go look at any primarily black school in any ghetto in America and understand why those white people fought when the National Guard was ordered to integrate their schools by gunpoint, literally.
Well, that's the amazing thing, though, isn't it? If you say that you want a white town and you're not forcing whites to form that town, if you say we want a white town, or we want a white school, or we want a white collective, that is so vehemently opposed by everyone. The media are like, oh my God, choosing to voluntarily live around each other. And they act as if you've literally said the most terrible thing, as if you just revealed yourself to be a vampire on live TV, and the shock and the horror. And yet, when they force integrated schools, it's not a matter of people doing it voluntarily. They force it at gunpoint. They literally have it enforced by soldiers, by troops. And that really shows the fallacy of everything they stand for. But to put the icing or the cherry on the cake, they are always so gleeful when non-whites or any form of minority or, non-white or non-traditionalist group voluntarily decides to come together as a group. So like here in the UK, if you see like a Muslim community centre, if a group of Muslims come together and actually organise along an ethnic line to do something, the media hold it up as if it's the greatest thing the UK's ever seen, a group of Muslims voluntarily organising, but if we do it, oh my God. And I think that is something, though, that we can use, because I remember recently there was a small town, a group of white nationalists tried to buy a small town that no one was living in. It was like a sort of you have ghost towns, don't they, that are more or less abandoned. And they decided to purchase this town and use it. And I thought that was really good because it just showed the hostility that these people have to just 5 families deciding to live together. But that's happening all over the UK because it's not happening on the scale where they're saying, right, we are openly moving in next to each other. But it's happening on the scale that white people don't want to live around these sub-Saharan Africans or these Arabs. So it's just called, like you said, white flight. They're not calling it an ethno-state or an ethno-village or an ethno-town. They're just creating it organically because they're fleeing multiculturalism, because multiculturalism is ruining their lives.
Yeah, and that white nationalist town, because they planted their flag, and some of the people involved in that were, I don't know, they wouldn't have, a lot of people might not have been able to relate to them, but they planted their flag and they said, this is our town, and the FBI moved in because they did that. If they had just, now I'm not saying they should have, but if they had just done it and maybe remained silent, nobody would have noticed because it was this little town, it was a few families, whatever. But they wanted to make a statement. But I think the point was lost on people because they don't see, the majority of the public has been propagandized and gaslit to the point where they don't see this as a moral right. And even though their own preferences, like white people will move if the area gets a little bit too vibrant. They talk about the schools in this neighborhood aren't very good, and everybody knows what that means. And so there's all these little ways of coping and these little things. And now we're in a situation where you have white families where the parents commute 2 hours each way back and forth to work in order to avoid the urban ghettos around the places of employment. So it's just like, it's absurd, the hoops that we jump through and pretend that we're enjoying a multicultural, diverse society where everyone gets along. It's the opposite. Everybody's uprooted all the time. And this is where the atomization comes from. Like white people, you used to have roots. My grandfather lived in this town. My parents lived down the block. My brothers and sisters, my cousins, they live, a few blocks away where we all go to church together. We've known the other families in the area for a couple of generations. That used to be town life in America, but that's been totally destroyed. There are kids that don't have a best friend because they move schools because their dad has to move because they don't want to, the economic upheaval on top of the, the moving schools because of demographic problems, and the people can't articulate it. And as soon as we give people back that language and that voice to talk about what's happening to them, it's going to be a very powerful thing. And political correctness is there not to prevent you from saying mean things about other people. It's to prevent white people from being able to self-advocate. That's the purpose. Because you can say mean things about people. Well, you get comedians and of color. They can say anything they want, and they can say anything they want about their own people, about any other people. They can make racist jokes. They can say whatever. Political correctness is denying whites the language of self-advocacy, and that's the real purpose. So that removal of that language has removed something in our minds that makes us think that we have the moral right to do this. But that's going to change. It's all changing, and they're very threatened and they're very angry about it.